for you to get into and connect and help you understand your great grandfather. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
The plot is Ajax has said some hubristic things like, I'm such a brilliant warrior, I don't need help from the gods. Bad idea in Greek myth. And Athena decides to punish him. He's very angry with his leaders. He feels he's been slighted because the great Achilles' arms did not go to him, and they really should have done. To all her out, he's by far the close second to Achilles. He's by far the best living warrior on the Greek side. He's like the centre back, you know. He's the one who holds everything together, stops the goals going in. He's saved so many lives. He's a magnificent warrior, but the arms went to the very clever Odysseus, who somehow managed to get them. And in the play, we start with Athena punishing him for being nasty to the gods, sends him mad. He wants to kill Agamemnon and Menelaus and Odysseus, the guys who didn't give him the arms. But he mistakes, she deludes him so that he attacks instead the livestock, the cattle and sheep of the kings. So when he comes round, he's just deeply humiliated. On top of not being slighted, he has now made a total fool of himself. And he tells his wife, Tecmessa, and the chorus, who are hugely dependent on him, they're his own regiment that he's brought from Salamis. They need him. He tells them that he's going to kill him, tells them he's going to kill himself. They say, oh dear. Then they keep watch on him. So to get rid of them, he tells them that he's fine. He's changed his mind. He's just going to go back and live in Salamis. Okay, he's done one stupid thing, but he's going to live his life and look after them all. He says that to get rid of them, then commits suicide on stage. There's only two such scenes in all of Greek tragedy where you get the violence, and they're both suicides. And that's halfway through the play. The second half is all the pain of the bereaved. That is what fascinates me so much. We get this heart-rending speeches from Tecmessa about her vulnerability now as a widow who's going to get raped probably because she no longer has a protector. She was a Trojan captive. The little boy has to intervene to try to, he's a suppliant to try to protect his father's corpse, which the enemy Greeks want to desecrate. The whole second half of it is about getting his corpse buried because the Atridae, Agamemnon and Menelaus, don't want. So the whole play is about how people feel when they were deceived. And they say all these things like, we should never have let him alone. We're so stupid. He was obviously disturbed. Why did we believe it when he lied? Now that interests me. It's not just my great-grandfather. I've read so much about suicide. The most vulnerable demographic by far is middle-aged men, young to middle-aged, who have been humiliated. They feel snubbed. They feel rejected professionally or in terms of male status. And they feel completely alienated from the people who love them, and they cannot talk to them. And what they do is lie and deceive to be able to convince people they're okay. There's a very close parallel in the recent remake of A Star is Born. Right, I don't know if you've seen that film, but where a great deal of, he says he's fine. When he has humiliated himself, he's been drunk, he's wet himself at an Oscars or at an awards ceremony. He's completely humiliated himself. His career is over, and he's not successful anymore as a singer. So he gets rid of everybody by saying he's fine, and he's going on the wagon, and he's going to have therapy, and he'll be fine. And he just takes that opportunity. Now, that is a really classic profile of a suicide. It's exactly what happened to my great-grandfather from what I could put together. He wanted to be mayor of Dunbar. He was on the council. His father-in-law, who of course is actually my great-grandfather, because he was married. He was the mayor for many, many years. He was the top dog in Dunbar. And my great-grandfather just hovered around with minor officers on the council. And I think he also had an acute drinking problem. If it wasn't drink, we found newspaper reports which showed that he'd been found very deranged in the streets sometimes. So he had humiliated himself like Ajax. But on the very day he did it, the newspapers say he was completely normal. He was completely at work. He was doing all the normal things. He looked completely calm. Nobody expected it. He deceived them into thinking he was all right and just went out in the evening after a day at the office and drowned himself. So the parallels are all there, but it's not just the parallel between Ajax and my great grandfather. It's between Ajax and a very large proportion of people who kill themselves. It's men we really have to watch out for because they are far more likely not to send out distress signals.
Well, another man that you focus on in Greek tragedy is Heracles. And you said that you discovered, I think at least, again, you can correct me if I've misinterpreted this, but you read that for the first time at Oxford. But it's one that you say you consistently go back and read and reread and reanalyze. What is it in particular about Heracles and that play that keeps pulling you in, that you think, God, this has to be spoken about as much as possible?
Well, because that's the optimistic one. That's the redemptive one. So I start the book with Ajax and how not to handle a depressed man who thinks he's a failure, right? And I end it with Heracles, which is exactly how to handle a depressed man who thinks he's a failure. Well, he is a failure. But so in that play, Heracles is portrayed very differently in different plays. The Greeks couldn't affect the total plot, the writers, but they could totally change characterization. And in that particular play, he's a wonderful father, a wonderful leader, a wonderful husband. You know, he's just a lovely, lovely person. Now, he hasn't even been rude about the gods. He has done nothing wrong, but his stepmother, Hera, absolutely hates him just because he's so successful and he was the product of her husband Zeus's relationship with someone else, Mina, a mortal woman. So she is incredibly annoyed about the happiness and success of her stepson and sends him mad halfway through the play. And he is deluded. He thinks that he's killing his worst enemy's family, not his own. And of course, he comes around and he has killed his wife and all three sons. Now, how many people would not want to kill themselves? How do you live? How do you live? You're not only thoroughly bereaved, you've lost everyone, but you did it, right? I mean, it's appalling. But his life is saved. The second whole half of that play is his friend, not relative, Theseus turns up, he rescued from the underworld. So there's a reciprocal tie of obligation. And his human father, who's not even his biological father, Heracles' human father, Amphitryon, his adoptive father. And this is very beautiful because this is humans' ties of love, not biology. And they have a word perfect script for talking him down from suicide. It's absolutely word perfect. I've talked to the psychoanalysts about it. I've talked to people trained to work for the Samaritans who talk to people like this on the telephone. So there are several things. First, they say, we are not leaving your side. Whatever you say, nobody is leaving you unattended. So you can't. Right? You just can't. We're not going to let you. So there's that security. They listen and listen and listen. Right? He pours out his distress, his whole life's misery of having to do all these ordeals because of this goddess, and the suffering, seeing these little corpses and his wife. But they offer him, Theseus offers him a life somewhere else. He obviously can't carry on living in Thebes where all this has happened, but he says, come and live with me. I will look after you in Athens. But the really important thing is they say what you've done does not cancel out everything you've done for Greece. You have liberated us from all these monsters and enemies and terrible things. You are a great man. You've done one bad thing, but it wasn't your fault. This does not wipe out what you've done. You know, you are a good person and you've got more good things to go on and do. And then we really need you. If you kill yourself, you're the most famous man in Greece. We all, you know, life is terrible. Life is just a horrible thing. If somebody as exemplary as you does it, then, you know, the effect on everybody, the demoralizing effect on everybody else You have actually got to go on living. And that is the heroic thing. They put it in his own language. True nobility and heroism is to decide to live even when your everyday is really unpleasant because you owe it to everybody else. And he gets that. And he says, okay, I see that that's true bravery. That's much braver than strangling the odd lion. That is true courage. And he goes off, and right at the end, he said, but I've got to deliver. Cerberus has been on stage all the time, by the way. People don't realise that with the play, because he's brought him back. It's his last ordeal. He's got to deliver him to Eurystheus, the horrible man who laid the labours on him. And he says, I've got to do this. But he says to Theseus, you've got to stay by my side all the time, because I think I might still damage myself. So he goes off to deliver Eurystheus, Cerberus to Eurystheus, but Theseus will never ever leave him alone. So it's exactly the opposite of the Ajax. It's how to handle a suicidal crisis. Extraordinary script, and it's never put on. And I think it's never put on because people don't like suicide, which I also discuss in the book. They think it's contagious. They think it's will encourage other people to do it. It's just too painful because it rams home the misery of the human condition. That why do we all carry on every day?
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because I think that your book does such a good job of balancing the ancient world. Your story is almost the illustration. I don't want to boil it down to an illustration, but you use your story to kind of show all of these teachings as well and how they've helped you, but also then, as we've briefly touched on, kind of the modern view of this. So I was wondering, through the journey of writing this book and researching, why do you think that suicide is clearly something that people are still very fascinated and want to talk about? Like, why is this something that keeps becoming the subject even of like Netflix series now and studies and all of this? Like, from your research, do you think there's a certain conclusion that you've come to?
Well, I think that is actually quite new. My research on all of this really does show that there has been a huge taboo. Maybe people have watched plays about it. There's plenty of suicide in Jacobean drama and that kind of thing, but there is no discussion in it at all of how the bereaved feel. There isn't. That's what I want this book to do. This is not actually, I mean, I hope it would help somebody in suicidal despair, but I hope what I'm really writing it for is people like my mother, who had to live her whole life knowing that 3 very close family members had just decided life's a bitch and it's not worth fighting her anymore. I mean, that is a terrible, terrible thing. Every time she was low, she must have considered it. She must have done. Of course, she didn't talk about it, so I don't know. But I can't believe she didn't. No, I mean, the human condition, if you don't believe in an afterlife and providential justice, that if you've been a good person, you're going to live in bliss for the rest of your life. And that the drop in the potency of religion is only really datable till the 1960s, right? Before the 1960s, certainly in Britain, most people said they were a believer, the majority. That is absolutely not the case now. So how do we make sense of however many years we get to live on the planet when there is just so much suffering and so much pain and so much grief? I mean, there is joy as well. We have to make sense of it. And if things go seriously wrong, it's incredibly tempting. I've been there myself several times. It's incredibly tempting just to stop the pain. So people are interested in it. But on the other hand, because it was proscribed, banned by Christianity, basically, for all the way through to the Enlightenment, it's not until the 18th century that you get discussions of suicide at all, which aren't all trammeled around by, we know that it's a mortal sin and I will end up in limbo at best and hell probably, and I can't be buried on sacred ground. I can't be buried at a church and my corpse may be desecrated, and I'm an actual total criminal. It's the Christian, and that also applies to the other great monotheisms and indeed a lot of other worldwide religions, because they had to have it because otherwise everybody does it.
Well, you also